All right. So, welcome to our second webinar in our um, inclusive astronomy outreach webinar. So if you're new here, we're doing this since 2022 or 2023, and we highlight um, the best practices in inclusive astronomy outreach worldwide. So we're doing this every quarter per year, and I think this is our second one for this year. And for this one, it's all about intro to web accessibility or how to reach more people through inclusive design by Rheanne Jimeno. But before we proceed with the webinar, I'll just read through all the house rules for this session. So first, the session will be recorded and this will be posted in our YouTube channel. So you can also find there our past webinars from 2023. And all participants, other than the speaker, moderator, are muted while the presentation is ongoing. But our speaker for today would like to be more engaged with this webinar. So feel free to send in your questions or um, your comments or anything in the chat, and then questions after the webinar, questions may be asked throughout the presentation by typing it in the QA or Q&A box, or you may post your questions in the chat box. And then the moderator, which is me, will notify the speaker to address your questions correspondingly. And lastly, enjoy the session. And again, I'm Kristine Atienza. I'm your moderator and your host for today. And moving forward to our speaker, so let me introduce you to our speaker for today. Rheanne is a designer and developer focused on creating accessible digital experiences. She ensures every product is inclusive, intuitive, and usable for people of all abilities. She is the creative director of Pumpkin Juice Creative, a social impact agency, and her team has twice won Accessibility Internet Rally, or AIR, a competition for building accessible websites. She is also involved in space outreach and advocacy with a focus on astronomy for mental health. Rheanne contributes to the Space Generation Advisory Council, or SJC, and the International Astronomical Union, where she is part of the Astro for Mental Health and Inclusive Outreach sub-working group. So this sub-working group as well. So without further ado, let me call on Miss Rheanne.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that generous introduction, Kristine. And am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible. I'll just stop sharing and so you can present your slide. No, I think you got muted, or is that me?
So, how
There.
many of you, noticed that I was muted when I was talking to the camera? Type 1 in the chat. Okay. Yes, type 1 in the chat. And how many of you was curious about what I said when I was muted? You can also just type 1. And how many of you felt a bit frustrated that even if I was called out that I was muted, I just continued on talking and talking without care, even if I was muted? And I just want to demo what it feels like when you are not heard, like when you are speaking, but your message is not being received by your audience. And that is what web accessibility is all about. It's about ensuring that the message that you want to put out, the message that you want people to know, can be heard and be understood by people regardless of their abilities or disabilities. So again, what I said a while ago was just really thanking you all of guys for just being here. I know that it is Friday night and you're here today listening to an intro to accessibility webinar instead of just enjoying yourself at your homes. So I'm really thankful and I will do my best to make your time worthwhile while we are here. So yeah, thank you very much. And before we start, can I request all of you to turn on your cameras just so that I can like see your faces and feel like I am actually talking to people. Hi, Sir Norma. Nice meeting you again here. Thank you for being here, Sir Norman. Hi, Cassandra. Kriza, Adriana, Argel. Uh, Thank you very much for turning on your camera. And thank you very much. And for those who cannot turn on their cameras, it's fine as well. It's fine. Just feel free to listen and type in the chat if you cannot really open your camera. But again, thank you for those who turn on their camera. It will help me a lot engaging whether I am boring you out already or not. And since we are just few in this chat, I want this really to be interactive. I don't want to like talk to the void, and I don't want this to be like another webinar that you will just forget after. So what I want for this webinar to be is that you will really gain some insights about web accessibility that you can take home and apply once you get home. So does that sound good, everyone? Okay, wait, I'll just adjust the view in my Zoom so that I can see you all. Yeah. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. So let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen now? Wait, I'm not seeing it, so sorry. Okay. Okay, can you see my screen? Oh, wait. I'll share again because I think I forgot to share the audio. Okay. Can you see my screen now? Okay. Again, welcome everyone. This is an introduction to web accessibility. And this is just an introductory like not course, introduction this is just an introduction. So basically, there's web accessibility is a broad topic, and we can deep dive to it, but it would take us hours or even days talking about web accessibility. But my goal here is for you to have a solid understanding on the overview or the best practices in web accessibility so that you can apply this to your own content whenever you're doing astronomy outreach or even on your own personal content. So yeah, let's start. So let's start with what web accessibility is. So in the simplest term, web accessibility is the process of ensuring that digital technology is usable by everyone, regardless of their ability or disability. So everything that we put out to the web, we want to make sure that we are not leaving anyone behind, that even though that they are blind or they are deaf or hard of hearing, even if they have cognitive disabilities, they can still interact with our content. And we have a whole guideline for that, which we call the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG. It's currently at version 2.2 right now. And you can look at this link for the entire guidelines, but those are basically recommendation or guidelines that we should follow so that we can make the websites or the content that we put on the web accessible. And I put a screenshot here of the contents of the WCAG. And as you can see, how many of you think that this is quite a lot? Wait, where's the chat box? Yes. Okay, yes, this is quite a lot. And I won't bore you in this webinar by talking about all of these one by one. We won't do that. And it's also not the right approach to learning about the WCAG. It's not the right approach in learning accessibility, because web accessibility isn't about checking off these boxes in the guidelines. It's really more about understanding the people that we are trying to reach. So it's about understanding the people with disabilities. What are their struggles? What barriers do they face when on the web? And what are the technologies that helps them overcome those barriers? And how can we make our content accessible to them? So we do not start from the guidelines, but we start from empathy, understanding these people that we want to reach. And so I would like you to have to watch this video. It's a very short one. And this is Marta, which is a marketing assistant who is both deaf and blind, so that you can have like an idea on what technology she uses and her struggles when it comes to web.
How people with disabilities use digital technology. Marta, a marketing assistant who is deaf and blind. Hi, I'm Marta, a marketing assistant at my school for the deaf. I'm deaf-blind. I was born deaf and have progressive vision loss, which means I can still see things if they're large and up close, but I see less and less each year. As a deaf child, I learned sign language early on. This is why technology is so important to me. It allows me to communicate with more people. At home, I have a computer that can enlarge my documents up to 20 times. I have a big screen, but can still only see a very small portion of the screen, and an even smaller portion of the documents because it's like looking through a magnification lens. I can find my way around documents with headings and sections that look different. For example, this briefing sheet uses a color for the headings that is different from the main content, which makes it easier for me to recognize them. Oh, and I'm learning to use Braille too. Braille are those dots that you read with your fingers, and I have this really cool device called a refreshable Braille display. It's a small device that I can take with me everywhere, unlike my computer. It has apps for email, web, and chat, and some have a special keyboard for typing in Braille. I read the Braille characters in a row on the device, which I'm slowly getting used to. It's always difficult to learn to use something new at first, but I'm getting better at reading and typing Braille. But not all websites and apps work well with magnification or on my Braille display. Like when I need to look up the bus schedule to meet up with my friends. That table doesn't work well when I enlarge it on my phone. And forget about trying to read it in Braille. I can't tell what row or column I'm in, and it just jumps all over the place. It makes me nervous because I can't as easily ask for help from people around me while I'm out. So I've been learning how to speak up and ask companies for more accessible websites and apps to help me stay independent. You can help make technology accessible to me. Accessibility. It's about people. For more information from the Web Accessibility Initiative on how people with disabilities.
So yeah, how many of you find that video powerful? Or how many of you it's the first time hearing about refreshable Braille display or seeing a blind person interact with the web? You can type 1 in the chat, or if you have reflections, feel free to type in the chat. So yeah, accessibility is like that. Like, it's the goal of web accessibility is to have some way, to provide some way of making the web accessible for people like Marta, who is deaf and blind. And Martha, and just on this video alone, we can already have some ideas on how can we make the web more accessible for her. For example, she mentioned that she magnifies the website because she cannot see clearly. So when making websites, we need to ensure that even when we magnify it 20 times larger, it will not break. It will still make sense at that zoom level. And also that your website must be properly coded so that the refreshable braille display will be able to read it well. So those are the things that we can deduce from that video. And Martha is just one of the many peoples with disability. And there are a lot. There are millions of people with disability, each with their own unique problems and struggles. And that's what we're here for today. And that's also why I want to introduce first, before discussing the guidelines, the different types of disabilities that we address. And so that by learning these disabilities, we learn more about their struggles. And also by learning about these disabilities, we can learn how to solve these struggles and how can we adjust so that these struggles won't be struggles anymore. So let's start with visual disability. And so how many of you find it hard to read this slide in particular? You can just type 1 or raise your hand. Okay, Anne, Adriana, thank you very much. Sir Norman, thank you very much. So in this slide, for example, I used a light text over a light background. So it's very hard to read. So you can maybe see the visual, but disability is hard to read. But this may be exaggerated, but you will be surprised that a lot of websites and layouts in the social media pages or carousels look like this. And how many of you agree that this is a better layout than the first one, right? And thank you very much. And just by adjusting the contrast, we made this slide more accessible to people. And all of us here, even if and one takeaway that I want you to get from here is that even if we are not visually disabled in this Zoom room, applying accessibility principle to the slide made it easier also for us. So web accessibility just does not just benefit those who have disabilities, but also for everyone. It is essential for people who have disabilities, but it is also beneficial for everyone. So yeah, by just adjusting the color contrast, we made it more accessible. And there's this resource by WebAIM so that we can check the color contrast of for example, if we are designing layouts for our social media posts or for the website, we can go in this website and look for the accessibility. Let's go to the website. So we can go here and look. So we can check for the contrast. So we can check the background color or the foreground color or the text color, and we can check the background color, and it will tell us if whether or not we pass the contrast requirements in WCAG. So WCAG also has levels of, like when we say AA, it's the target of most developers or designers that we must pass the AA level of compliance. And when it comes to AAA, it's an ideal version. So it's hard to pass this. But yeah, and it may not be practical because it has hard requirements. But yeah, the goal is to pass at least AA. So you can just see here what colors you use, and then you can tell whether or not they pass the contrast requirements in WCAG. So yeah. And then yeah. So when it comes to blindness, when it comes to visual disability, what first comes to mind is blindness, right? But there's much more to visual disability than blindness. There are low vision people, there are people who are colorblind. And for blind people, they use what we call as screen reader. So what screen reader does is that they read out, as the name implies, they read out what's written in the screen, and the user will be able to hear what's written. So the most famous ones is JAWS, and the free version for Windows is NVDA. And if you are a Mac or Apple user, you can experiment and check out VoiceOver so that you can see how blind people use screen readers for them. So I can demo a little bit, but disclaimer that I'm not an expert at screen readers, but this is how it looks like. So I'm using JAWS. I'm using NVDA. Okay.
Running app. Okay. WebAIM. Running applications.
So I'm just gonna tab through the website.
Permalink link. Sample text input. Edit selected text input.
So when I tab to the website, it reads out the screen.
Learn more about WebAIM evaluation
When
services link.
When I tab through the website,
Wave link.
it will jump to the next link.
Our link contrast checker link.
And it will read out the text. So that
Permalink
is how
link.
screen readers work.
HTTP complementary landmark related resources heading level
So
2.
that's
Running
it
NV
for-
NV exit. Notification. Running WebAIM. Running NV
And I will
exit.
close it.
Exit NV. Running app. Okay.
Yeah. So that's how a screen reader works. And then, like what the video that I showed you before, we have here the refreshable braille display. So like Martha, some people are both deaf and blind, so they cannot rely on screen readers because they cannot hear what the screen reader says. So what they have is a refreshable braille display, so that instead of hearing it, they can just touch the display and then they can read whatever is written on the screen. So that is how screen readers work. Refreshable braille display works. And then we also have the low vision people. So for low vision people, these are the types of vision impairments where it cannot be corrected by mere eyeglasses. So we have macular degeneration, for example, like there's something blocking the center of their vision, and glaucoma is the opposite, whereas they can only see the center and not the edges of their vision. So let's have an activity. So to simulate macular degeneration, you can put your hands in front of you, like 12 inches in front of your eyes, and look or focus on your palm. And then try to read the text that I put here, but your eyes should be focused on your hand. You will just read it through your peripheral vision. So can someone read the text? Or was it hard? Yes. Is it hard? Yes, it's very hard. So that is just one example of vision impairment. And the glaucoma is quite the opposite. It's like they have a very narrow field of vision, and it's like looking on a straw. So we can simulate this by forming a circle, using our fingers, and trying to read it like that. So when people think of accessibility or making text accessible, a lot of people will assume that let's just make the text bigger because it can be read by a lot of people if it's big, right? But for people with glaucoma, it's hard to do that because they have a narrow field of vision. So this just proves that accessibility is not really a one size fits all, because what's accessible for one disabled person is not accessible for another. So what can we do about that? And what we can do is that we should make the websites that we create like adjustable. So the users must have a control whether they increase the font size or they decrease the font size, that your website will not break. So yeah, that's it for the low vision. And another one for the vision impairments is the color blindness. So a lot of males, I think around 8% of males have color blindness, and the most common one is a red-green color blindness or protanopia. And this is a common mistake because a lot of people, for example, in errors and acceptance, like they use green for good and red for not good or error. And when we only convey information through colors, for people who are colorblind, it's hard to distinguish between the two. So for example, here we have a map. I think this is a rail in New York, and the informations are conveyed via colors. And there's a color blindness simulator in this link. I will not click it, but this is how it looked like for a person who has a protanopia. So can it distinguish between red and green? So from this picture, it's hard for them to know which way is which. So when designing or when we want to make the designs that we do accessible to people, we must keep in mind that when we are designing, that we do not use colors as the sole distinction between two different elements. So for example, we can use patterns. So we can put stripes maybe on the red one, and we can put like polka dots on the other one. So that even if it's like monochrome, for example, it was printed on paper, it can also still be distinguishable. So that's one principle of web accessibility as well. So yeah, that's it for the visual disabilities. Are you learning so far? Okay, thank you so much. Okay, next is for auditory disability. So I have another video right here,
How people
but I will mute the video to drive my point. Let's try watching it. Okay. So how many of you understood what was said on the video? Did anybody understand anything? No, right? Because he was using sign language, and I'm assuming none of us here knows BSL. He's using British Sign Language in this, I think. And then also there are no captions. So for auditory disabilities, it's really straightforward that we put captions in our video and subtitles and transcripts and audio description, because without it, we cannot really understand if we are not hearing anything. So let's continue the video without with captions this time, and also with audio. Oh, yes.
I recently enrolled in an online degree. For my classes, I schedule interpreters who can interpret the lectures and conversation and voice for me. I need video conferencing apps with functionality to pin videos of the interpreters so that I can always see them. Some lectures have real-time captioning typed by human captioners. This is more accurate than automatic captions, which often don't recognize specialized terms in the lectures. For our assigned videos, I rely on good captions. These are edited so that each sentence appearing on the screen is not too long and is synchronized with the audio. I also often find myself needing to adjust the text size and colors of the captions to be able to read them better. Some apps also allow me to move the captions to the top or bottom of the video so that they are not in the way. In some situations, I find myself lip reading. For example, when I'm on unplanned calls without interpreters or other people who can sign. I learned lip reading over the years because of such situation, but it's not always reliable for me. I need to see the person's mouth, have them speak clearly, and seeing their gestures also helps. Yet it's exhausting and not really something I can keep doing for too long. I also use the chat function. Some chat tools support real-time text rather than line-by-line text messages. This is much more interactive. I can engage with my friends in text conversation as others do by voice. Of course, the classes also come with a lot of reading. I'm fine with that, except when the writing is unnecessarily complex and without structures like lists and headings. People don't realize that for me, reading text involves extra effort because sign language is my native language. So, like for everyone else, clear and simple writing makes text easier to understand. You can help make technology accessible to me.
Accessibility. It's about people. For more information from the Web Accessibility Initiative,
So yeah, that's the video about the Dhruv, who is a deaf student, and I hope it gave you perspective on how we can make the web more accessible for people like Dhruv, who is hard of hearing or deaf. So when it comes to auditory disability, we are talking about people who are deaf and the hard of hearing people. But like the visual impairments that we discussed earlier, deafness also comes in spectrum. So there are people, for example, who cannot hear quiet sounds, but there are also people who can not hear certain frequencies. For example, they cannot hear high frequencies or low frequencies. So Dhruv, in the case of Dhruv, he can hear sounds, but he cannot hear in an extent that he can hear human speech. So that is one consideration as well. And when we think about making things accessible for deaf people, the first thing that comes to mind for a lot of people is sign language. And it is true because sign language, a lot of deaf people grew up learning sign language, and it is a language really. It is not English. It is a different language altogether with different grammar, different structure. And that is why for deaf people, it might also be hard for them to read a lot of text because it's like a foreign language for them. So that is how it is with deaf people. And also, one thing that is a misconception is that sign language is universal. So as you can see, Dhruv uses British Sign Language, but there's also American Sign Language, which is, I guess, the most mainstream one. But ASL is actually the 7th most popular sign language. The Indian Sign Language is the most used sign language. There's also Filipino Sign Language, and there's around 300 different sign language all over the world. And there's no one size fits all when it comes to sign language. There has been efforts to create international sign language, but it did not really take off. So yeah, when it comes to sign language, we shouldn't also assume that everyone speaks the same language, and also that every deaf people knows how to sign. Because some people, they also grew up lip reading. They grew up orally, they did not learn sign language. They adapted by doing lip reading, but again, like what Dhruv said, it is not that accurate sometimes, especially when the context is very specialized, when there are new terms. And there are also people who use technologies like cochlear implants so that they can hear, but also just because they have a cochlear implant, it doesn't mean that they can hear the same way that we people without hearing impairments do. So yeah, that's it for the auditory disability. So again, the way for us to make the content that we put on the web accessible for people who has auditory disability is to put captions, transcripts, and audio description, especially, for example, in the Reels, which is very famous right now, and in our YouTube video, and even on like the songs, it helps that if you put the lyrics and things like that. So that's it for auditory. And that leads me to the first principle of accessibility that we will discuss, which is perceivable. So perceivable means that information and interface components must be presented in ways people can detect and interpret, whether through sight, sound, or touch. So if your content cannot be perceived, it will not reach your audience. For example, at the first slide, the color contrast is not that good. They cannot perceive the content. And also, for example, a person has no lacks a sense. Like for example, she has no vision. So there must be a way for that person to perceive the content in other ways, whether it be through audio, like a screen reader, or touch, like a braille display. Similarly, for example, for deaf people, since they cannot hear audio, there must be a way for them to perceive the content through other means, like through sight. Like they must be able to see the captions, the transcripts that is accompanied, that accompanies the video. So yeah, that is the first principle of accessibility, which is perceivable. So yeah, let's move on to the next type of disability, which is the motor disability. Are you still awake, guys? Are you still awake? Are you learning? Okay, thank you so much. So the next type of disability is motor disabilities. And motor disabilities is a wide range of disabilities out there, because it includes any condition that limit movement. And so they find it hard to use, for example, a mouse in navigating like, for example, PC. So I'll just show you some clips on some assistive devices that people use to overcome this barrier. So this is a mouse stick.
Hi.
Sorry.
I can type on the keyboard and use the mouse.
So yeah, as you can see, it's a mouse stick. There's just a stick that they put on the mouse so that they can type using the keyboard. That's a mouse stick because they cannot use their hands for that. And then there's also switches, which are like this. So Daniel can only move her head. So Daniel can only move her head. So the way she controls her iPad is by moving her head with the buttons on the side of their head. So when we make websites or web applications, we must consider that it must be simple enough that they can like operate it by using just simple button, 1 or 2 buttons. Because many people cannot use the mouse for precise movements. So, and then the next one is, and the last one is this.
I want to share with you how I use my
So
Sip and Puff drive system on my wheelchair
this is a
to
Sip
control
and
my
Puff.
phone. Off-the-shelf hands-free technology is helpful but has its limitations. With the software, you
Assistive device. So it works by just blowing, and then you can control your devices through that. So this leads us to the second principle of accessibility, which is operable. So the first is perceivable, the second is operable. So operable means that users must be able to navigate and interact with your website using a variety of tools and methods, not just a mouse. So like the previous examples a while ago, they are using other devices like the switch control and the half switch and the mouse stick. So when building our website, we must ensure that it is compatible with these devices. And one way to check that is, for example, we don't have these assistive devices, but we want to build our own website. We just use the keyboard. So we can challenge ourselves, like try navigating the web one day or for 1 hour without mouse. Try sending an email, try uploading a picture, and see how hard it is. So yeah, that is the second principle of accessibility, which is operable. And lastly, for the types of disabilities are cognitive disabilities. So cognitive disabilities, also referred to as intellectual disabilities, encompass a broad range of conditions that affect how a person processes information, learns, remembers, and makes decisions. I don't want to read the rest of the paragraph. So in these slides, what can you notice? Can somebody tell me what's wrong with this slide? Can type in the chat. Yeah, yes, there's a lot of movement and content, too much text. It's cognitive overload. So this is a demo. If you felt a little overloaded or found it hard to focus on the main point of the slide, you just had a taste of what it can be like for someone with a cognitive disability when interactive with content like this, with a lot of moving things and unstructured content. So for cognitive disabilities, some content are really too complex for us to communicate, especially for people who have profound cognitive impairments. But we can still make efforts on simplifying content so that we can reach as many people as possible. So for cognitive content, we have two ways of classifying cognitive disabilities. First is the clinical, and the second one is functional. So for clinical, we have the diagnosis like autism, Down syndrome, ADHD, dyslexia. Those are medical or clinical. But what's more useful in web accessibility is the functional categorization, which is what are the difficulties of those who have cognitive disabilities? What makes it hard for them to interact with the web? Because when you say, for example, to a developer that, oh, I want my app to be accessible to people with autism, it doesn't really make sense, or it doesn't really mean anything, because autism by itself is also a spectrum. There are high functioning people with autism, and there are those who cannot even like verbalize their thoughts. So when it comes to web accessibility, we look at the functional categorization, which is, for example, a person, an aging person has a problem with memory, so that, for example, when filling up forms or when browsing websites, sometimes they forget where they are in the website. So one way for us to make the web more accessible to them is to have like reminders, for example, breadcrumbs on where they currently are. And for example, for people who have difficulties in problem solving, one way we can make the web more accessible to them is that when entering forms, like if there is an error, we will be specific. Like for example, oh, you did not put your surname or invalid format, instead of them like guessing why their forms are not like pushing through. So that is one way that we can do. And then for attention, like my example a while ago, avoid moving objects because they can be very distracting. And there must be a way for people to, for example, there are moving contents, there must be a way for them to pause those content in order for them to stop moving. And lastly, comprehension, whether it be on linguistic, math, or visual, we make the structure very simple. We do not put heavy blocks of text in the website or even in our social media content. We structure them in a way that is understandable for people. So that brings us to the third principle of web accessibility, which is understandable. So your website's content must be clear, must be consistent, and should be easy for people to understand, regardless of their abilities or familiarity with your site. A lot of websites today are full of animations, like a lot of things going on, so that it can be aesthetic. But when it comes to web accessibility, the simpler, the better. And the goal is for us to be able to communicate the things that we want to be communicated in the most simple manner. And so, yeah, we have covered the 4 types of disabilities, which are visual, auditory, motor, and cognitive. Of course, there are still a lot of disabilities which are not covered in this. For example, seizures. So one of the ways that we can make sure that content is accessible for people with seizures is avoiding putting flashing content on your design. And yeah, there's a lot of still disabilities, but I covered like the majority of them here in these 4 umbrellas. And that brings me to the last principle of accessibility, which is abbreviated as POUR. So these are the POUR principles of accessibility: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So robust means that your content should work well with different browser devices and assistive technologies, both now as technology evolves. So it really just means compatibility through different browsers. For example, when you're using Chrome, Safari, Edge, it must be compatible with that. And also in different mobile devices, whether you're browsing on your desktop, on your iPad, or mobile phone. And also future-proof, that it must be properly coded, that you are using the proper semantics in your code so that it will be still compatible for future versions of the app that you are using. And similarly, I also want to interpret this robust as, for example, in the context of this webinar, as being future oriented. So similarly in this webinar, I hope that this will not be the last time that you will explore about accessibility. I hope that this is only the start. And for the future, I hope that you continue on learning different accessibility practices. So yeah, that's it for my talk for today. I hope you learned a lot or some. Even if only one of you implemented some of the things that I said in this webinar, it's already a win for me. So yeah, thank you very much for attending, and I hope you learned something. And also, if you have any questions, you can email me at rheannejimeno@gmail.com, and you can also connect with me at LinkedIn using this link. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Rheanne, for that wonderful presentation. I've learned a lot. I mean, I've been doing accessibility, but not in the web, but yeah. Thank you very much. We have 6 minutes for question and answer. Does anyone have any question? Rheanne? You can either, go, Cassandra?
Thank you. Thanks, Rheanne, for this really interesting presentation, which I learned a lot from, so really appreciate it. I had a question about captioning on videos. So we do that as standard now. We always put subtitles on our videos, but I see some places do kind of like burnt-in captions. We do closed captions, and I'm wondering what the kind of gold standard is for that. What's the best type of captioning to do?
The best type of captioning is really the soft caption, so that we can change the languages. Because if the caption is built in on the video and we put another caption, like for example, for another language, it will interfere with the caption. So it's best if the caption is separate from the video itself. Yes.
Perfect. We'll keep doing that then. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have a question. So, as you mentioned, there are lots of things that we need to remember. But for you, what do you usually do for your sites or for your web content?
Like the lowest hanging fruits, you mean?
Yes, yes.
Yes. The lowest hanging fruits will really be putting a text or alternative text. So I did not discuss it here, but alt text are the text that accompanies an image. So when you upload an image, for example, on social media, you have an option to put an alt text. So what an alt text does is that it describes the image that you are uploading. So that, for example, screen reader users, when they see the image that you uploaded, they will have a context on what the image is all about. So that's one low-hanging fruit that is oftentimes ignored, but it's very helpful, especially for blind people. And the other thing is color contrast. It's very easy to implement, and yeah, it really just helps a lot, regardless of whether you're vision impaired or not.
Any more questions? You can type it in the chat as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Muhammad. Thank you. Any other questions? So if you don't have any questions, I will be the one to ask the question. So what about you? Like, what's your main takeaway, or if there's one thing that you can take away from this talk, what's the one thing that you can like apply, or maybe some sort of open something new for you or widen your perspective? Can I know for anyone? Yeah, thank you, Lavella. Thank you. Yes, let's make it a habit to put an alt text. And especially now with the advent of AI, it's very easy to put alt text. You can use AI for that, but what's important is that alt text is also highly contextual, that depending on the context, the alt text can change. Yes.
I think Cassandra has another question.
Go Cassandra.
Oh, just a takeaway, really. Like, I hadn't realized, one of the things I hadn't realized that came out in your talk was that for people who their first language is sign language, that they would find it very difficult actually to read text because it's not actually it's not the same as English. Like, I hadn't realized that at all, so that was really, really useful. But I did have a question about how do you, so we obviously, when we're making our websites, we want them to look snazzy and we want them to look cool. So how do we balance that kind of creative need to create something that's really kind of visually stunning with accessibility? Like, where do you kind of draw the line? I can see there'd be some tension coming in some cases.
Thank you for that question. I think that's also a question that comes up a lot, because there's also a misconception that when your website is accessible, it's boring because there's a lot of guidelines that you should follow. But it's not really mutually exclusive. You can still have a great looking website with it being accessible and aesthetic. So the guidelines really are just about, yeah, because the guidelines help you when it comes to user experience, like avoiding moving elements, for example. You can still put moving elements as long as the users have a way to pause them, as long as the users have control over them. So you can be as free as you want, as long as you understand the guidelines or the concept behind them. Yes.
In that context as well, I'm actually thinking now, because usually astronomy websites or astronomy pages tends to be very dark and it's kind of hard to see. So yeah, I'm just thinking like how we can improve those like our astronomy websites, which are most of the time image heavy, and kind of dark.
Yes. Yes, one way is for websites to be flexible, really. So if there's a way for people to turn on like dark mode or light mode, that would be best. But it's kind of hard to implement practically. But black on white text will seem to be like ideal for people, but really is not also accessible. But because when you put white text on black background, even though they are there's high contrast, like it's dizzying, as you said. But we can adjust by not using pure black. We can still use darker shades, but not pure black and not pure white as well, so that the contrast is not that high and it's easily readable.
I have questions here in the chat. So, from Norman, how do we manage simplicity of content on sites that have to have an depth or elaborate discussion?
So I think for a lot of content, like it's really about knowing our audience. Like if you're targeting general audience, of course you want to make it in a way that they can understand. But if your site is for example, for science people, for scientific people, so it is acceptable to use jargons if it cannot be avoided. But it's really just a guidelines of as much as possible for general use for website that we make use of simple terms and avoiding jargon so that they can understand it. And it is especially true for not just content, but for example, when filling up forms, like do not use uh jargons, especially for instructions that they need to follow. For example, in paying bills, that we make it simple for them to follow. So yeah, it's
Next
highly
question.
contextual.
Sorry. Next question from Arhel. Does alt have nothing to do with SEO? Is it just for accessibility?
Alt text is actually useful for SEO as well. So not only does it make your content more accessible to people, it also makes it so that you are highly favored by the search engine algorithm because you are adding context to the image that you provide. Yeah, so it helps SEO as well. So it's two birds, one stone. It's not just for accessibility. That's why applying accessibility principles not only help the people with disabilities, but also in the business sense, like for business websites, they can have a higher discoverability when they put good accessibility practices. And also it's all accessibility is one of the criteria of Google in ranking search engine websites. Yes.
Last question from Mohammed. What types of fonts should we use on web for better accessibility or readability?
Okay. For fonts, generally it's better to use sans serif or those fonts without the ligatures or the end of the in the end. So like the fonts that I use in my presentation, those are called sans serif fonts. Serif fonts are fine as well, as long as we avoid those highly decorative fonts that uh, we cannot read, especially when paragraph. For example, calligraphy fonts, they are great when used in headings, but when you use calligraphy fonts in the text, it's hard to read. So yeah. And also for fonts, it's better to use fonts that are like available through all the devices because there are fonts that only exist on your device and they still need to download that, and sometimes it will not show up as it is because it's not compatible with their device because they do not have that font. So it's better to use the famous fonts and accessibility. But yeah, it's still acceptable to use other fonts as well. Just be mindful of the readability of the chosen fonts.
All right. I think that ends our webinar for today, unless you have more questions. But yeah, or maybe you can also email or send Rheanne a link if you need help with making your websites accessible. So that ends our webinar for today. Again, thank you for attending this webinar, and we hope to see you again for our next webinar. Hopefully, we have one more before the year ends. All right. Thank you, Rheanne, and thank you for everyone for attending this call. And see you.
Thank you. See you.